Well, good morning, everyone. I have two ribbons in my Bible, and I just opened to 2 Corinthians. That's not where we're going to be this morning. But I need to take care of a little business beforehand. Here is Axel Wayne Brainerd, born January 13th, weighing 6 pounds, 7 ounces. I always like to say stretching the tape at 19 inches and 3/4. Sometimes people wonder why someone chooses a name. I know when we chose our son's name, Nathaniel, a big part of that was the meaning of it, which was gift of God. And that's the case here as well. Axel means father of peace. And so it's Scandinavian for those of you who are into etymology. So I'd like you to open your Old Testaments, to 2 Kings chapter 5. And I have to tell you, it's been a chilly winter so far, so it's kind of heartwarming to see all of you here. But we have been really blessed. We kind of live in the tropics of Bremerton because it's been snowy and icy to the east of us, to the north of us, and especially to the south of us. And we just haven't had that bad of a time with it. So we are blessed. And we have a number of visitors with us this morning. Thank you very much for being with us. We also welcome those of you who are joining us on Zoom, and of course all of you who are regular part of this family. God has blessed us in his Son. I leaned over and told Robin, every once in a while, and maybe I need to happen more frequently, but every once in a while what God did for us in Jesus Christ just strikes me at my core. It's amazing, it's astounding. The love and mercy that he's shown to us. And so, again, thank you all for joining with us in the worship that we had together. We began a series back in September entitled Ordinary People, Extraordinary God. And it started as a 4-lesson series. We've covered 3 lessons so far, Moses, Nicodemus, and then last month in December we covered Mary, the mother of Jesus. So this is our 4th lesson. But I have to tell you, I have no guarantees that there won't be more as we go along here. The underlying theme, and I think what we need to understand is the people that God calls they're not mighty, they're not wise, they're not influential. Paul mentions that in 1 Corinthians, the 1st chapter there. He chose the weak things and the foolish things. And he calls folks that are just like us. The person we're looking at today is actually so ordinary that she doesn't even have a name. In fact, she's a slave. And yet I think that there is a lot that we can learn from her, along with the very familiar biblical story here in 2 Kings 5 that she is a part of. So I want to begin by reading that lengthy text. And throughout the lesson, if you'll just leave your Bibles open to this, all the other texts will be on the screen. The Bible says, now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means go, the king of Aram replied. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. And the letter that he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter I'm sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy. As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me. When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message, "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than any of the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, 'Wash and be cleansed'?" So he went down, dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. As we go into the lesson this morning, I need to give you a good bit of background on this, but I promise before we're done, we will take a closer look at our slave girl and see how she can be an encouragement and an example for all of us. So again, just keep your Bibles here, and every other place will be on the screen. So let's talk first about Aram. Aram as a person was the son of Shem, who was a son of Noah. And his descendants settled in the northeast portion of the Promised Land. Here's the map. You can see Aram up there to the right. It's also, or became later known as Syria. And the capital of Aram is Damascus, which is right there. And I just found out recently that Damascus is the oldest inhabited city on the planet. There's been people there longer than any other place. Just put that away in your little trivia drawer. They are, as you can see, next door neighbors to the northern tribe, northern nation of Israel, which is made up of the northern 10 tribes. And actually after Solomon and Rehoboam, and as we moved on through the history, Aram was almost in constant war with Israel. Now the battle that we have mentioned at the beginning of the raids and etc. that were done actually comes from 1 Kings chapter 22. And as you recall, Ahab has decided he wants to fight Aram. He's invited Jehoshaphat, who's the king of Judah, to become an ally with him in this war against Aram. And Jehoshaphat wants to know whether or not God would bless that. And so Ahab has a bunch of his prophets come in, and they all say go, and Jehoshaphat wants to know if there's a prophet of Yahweh present. And so Micaiah is brought in, and he's going to end up prophesying against it. And I just want us to see this interchange here in 1 Kings 22. It says, all the other prophets were prophesying the same thing. Attack Ramoth Gilead and be victorious, they said, for the Lord will give it into the king's hand. The messenger who had gone to summon Micaiah said to him, look, the other prophets without exception are predicting success for the king. Let your word agree with theirs and speak favorably. But Micaiah said, as surely as the Lord lives, I can tell him only what the Lord tells me. When he arrived, the king asked him, Micaiah, shall we go to war against Ramoth Gilead or not? Skipping down a little bit because I repeated that sentence. Micaiah said, attack and be victorious, for the Lord will give it into the king's hand. The king said to him, how many times must I make you swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord? So Micaiah just did what the servant told him and told a lie at the beginning to make a point. Then Micaiah answered, I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd. And the Lord said, these people have no master. let each one go home in peace. Of course, there was some conversation in between that in that section, but then we get down to verse 28. Micaiah declared, if you ever, speaking about Ahab, because he told Ahab he would die there, if you ever return safely, the Lord has not spoken through me. Then he added, mark my words, all you people. Well, as it turned out, Ahab was killed. He was killed right here in Ramoth Gilead, which is right on the border there. And all of this upheaval and tumult and war was all a part of God's will in punishing Israel for their idolatry and for punishing Ahab with regards to the death of Naboth and stealing his vineyard. So that's the background. So now let's look at Naaman and see how Naaman is described here in our text. Number one, he was the commander of the army of the king of Aram. The king of Aram is Ben-Hadad. And Ben-Hadad, when he was younger, he was the one who led all these expeditions. If you'll just kind of skip over in your Bibles to verse 18 of chapter 5, right in the middle there, Naaman says, when my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm. And so now Ben-Hadad is an old man. In fact, he needs to have help to get around. So he doesn't go on these raids anymore. He's now sending Naaman. And Naaman was a great man in the eyes of Ben-Hadad. And so you say, great in what sense? Well, probably with regard to the fact that he's rich and he has position. He's gaining the booty of all their raids and all of that. If you go back in your Bibles, I don't have this on the screen, but in 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 8, it talks about the Shunammite woman. And one day Elisha went to Shunem, and a well-to-do woman was there who urged him to stay for a meal. The word well-to-do is exactly the same word that's used here of Naaman, that he was great. And of course, Naaman had many victories. He was a valiant soldier. But we have kind of a parenthesis statement here. We know something about Naaman and his success that neither Naaman nor the king of Aram knows. And that is that the reason he's successful is because the Lord is helping him. The Lord is blessing him. He's the one giving the victory. And so it's not because of the strength of the Syrian army. It is not because Naaman is such a brilliant tactician that he knows exactly what to do. Rather, the Lord is giving him the victory. I just want you to stop and think, because this book, this history was written for Jewish people. How would that make you feel as a Jewish person reading this? Number one, you'd be upset because you're being defeated, but now even more so because Yahweh is the one helping the enemy defeat you. And I think that's something also important for us, because in Daniel, the 4th chapter, in verse 17, the decision is announced. This is a statement to Nebuchadnezzar by the messengers. The Holy Ones declare the verdict so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes and sets over them the lowliest of people. God's in control. He's in control of the nations. And we often relate that to kings and rulers and things like that. But listen, God's not limited in the ways in which he exerts his general will. He doesn't have to just use the ruler. In this case, he's using Naaman. Which, just as an aside, that's why when it comes to politics, I just let God do the work. I don't get worried about it. And you don't have any idea how much more pleasant my life is as a result of that. We're also told one other thing about Naaman. He had leprosy. Leprosy is a disease of the nerves and the respiratory system. It can cause, and often does cause, skin lesions. But listen, body parts don't fall off because you have leprosy. I know that's the big joke or the big thing that people say about that. They can become deformed, but they don't just fall off. But leprosy was incurable by natural or medical means. It's highly contagious. Leviticus, the 13th chapter, verses 45 and 46. Someone that has leprosy has to keep their lower part of their face covered. and cry out, unclean, unclean. As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone. They must live outside the camp. Didn't we just go through that? Where we had to be separate? This is not the first time that's ever happened, and we thought the world was coming to an end. That's a side comment by me. And while there's lots of passages in the Old Testament, especially the book of Leviticus, about determining or diagnosing leprosy, it seems that most of the people in the Bible who are named, who are recorded as having leprosy, that most of them were struck with leprosy by God. Moses in Exodus, the 4th chapter, at the burning bush, put your hand in, bring it out, it was leprous. Put it back, bring it out, it's gone. Miriam and Aaron decided that Moses was taking too much on himself. How dare he pretend he's boss? You know, the baby brother, who wants that as a boss? And so Miriam was struck with leprosy. But it went away. God cured her in a short period of time. Uzzah, was a king who decided, well, I'll not only be king, I think I'll be priest too, and I'll start making sacrifices. And God struck him with leprosy, which was not cured. He had it till the end of his death. And now we have Naaman. I don't know if God struck him with leprosy or not. But yet, the disease that he had here is central to the story because, listen, there's hardly any disease that was present in that day and time that would have been worse for a person to have than leprosy. I mean, it's career ending for him. The other part of the lead-in to this story is that Aram has been making successful raids on Israel, and they had taken captives. And one of the captives that we are specifically told about is our slave girl here in 2 Kings 5. And it was a young girl is what it says in the text, and that's kind of interesting in the Hebrew because girl is na'ara, and it means girl or maiden, so a very young person. And then we have on top of that, young, to add to our understanding of it, and that's katan, which means small, young, or unimportant. Listen, small, young, and unimportant girl is exactly the opposite of a respected or great man in this culture. On the social ladder, she's at the bottom. I'm not even sure if she has a rung. I think she's what the ladder rests on. I mean, she's certainly less than a man who's a slave. So, the fact that she is also said that she is the slave or the servant of Naaman's wife, the Hebrew there is Haya, and it means a person who's ready to obey at any time. She's at her mistress's beck and call. Now again, and I've talked about this for you for 20 years. As you're reading through a story, sometimes you just need to stop and think. If you had, let's put our place in her shoes. If you had been captured, ripped away from your family as a young girl, maybe the only survivor, maybe the rest of your family was all killed, you're the only survivor, and you find yourself now in Aram, the servant to the wife of the guy who's behind it all, Naaman, what would your attitude be towards these people? And yet what I see her doing here is confiding to her mistress about her master. Oh, if only he knew about the prophet in Israel who could cure him of his leprosy. And I assume, as leprosy was kind of that kind of disease, it's getting worse. And she's noticing, oh man, I wish he could see the prophet. And bringing that up. Rather than saying, I know how he could be cured, but I'm not telling these people. Listen, that's exactly the opposite of what we would think. It's exactly the opposite of the readers of this text of the Jews are thinking, why are you doing that? Why are you helping them? There's a total absence of the natural animosity, the natural prejudice in her. In fact, there's only goodwill and concern from her towards them. Now, I'll tell you that there's nothing more said about the slave girl in this story. That's it. That's the last we're going to hear from her. Not the last you're going to hear from me about her, but that's the last we're going to hear from her in the text. But I want us to notice the continuing story here. I obviously read more than just that this morning, because there's some lessons here that are important for us as well. So Naaman informs Ben-Hadad about what the slave girl had said to his wife, who told him. And Ben-Hadad then says, go, and I'll send a letter with you to the king of Israel, who is, depending on your translation, it's either Joram or Jehoram. Listen, the kings of Israel and Judah about that time, they even have on both ends the same name. So it becomes confusing. So he sends Naaman with this letter to Jehoram, along with an amazing gift. And I think that just accentuates the fact that we read earlier in verse 1 that Naaman was highly regarded by the king of Aram, because he sent him 10 talents of silver. That's about $183,000. 6,000 shekels of gold. That's almost $3.2 million. And 10 sets of clothes. And when I say 10 sets of clothes after I tell you millions and millions of dollars, you say, 10 sets of clothes? Ho hum. You know, what was that? Listen, you couldn't go to Walmart and just buy clothes in those days. They all had to be woven and dyed and hand sewn. And clothes were valuable. And to get 10 sets was amazing. So he delivers the letter to Jehoram there in verse 6. And we're even told what the letter said. With this letter, I'm sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy. Cure my servant of his leprosy. Listen, that's an impossible task. King Jehoram is going to liken it to being able to raise the dead. He might as well, listen, Ben-Hadad might as well have sent his goat and said, teach my goat to fly. I mean, that's how impossible and absurd this request is. And King Jehoram feels cornered. There's just no way that I can do this. And he feels like the king is trying to provoke a war. And so what does Jehoram do? He tears his robes. There's clothing again. And how valuable it is. And in fact, Elisha hears about what Jehoram has done. He doesn't hear what Jehoram has said. You'll notice the text. Elisha heard that Jehoram had torn his robes. I'm just trying to expand on the 10 sets of clothing, so you understand how valuable that is. So Elisha hears and sends word to the king to send Naaman to him. Now I'll tell you, that gives me a little bit of insight in what's going on here. Because listen, why didn't Jehoram think, I'll just send him to Elisha, Elisha, who is a prophet of God, and he can take care of it for me. If you look in chapters 2, 3, and 4 of 2 Kings, you'll see all kinds of miracles that Elisha has done. He's healed water. He had 42 young men killed by 2 bears because they called him bald-headed. It's called a pregnant pause. He caused the widow's oil to multiply. He raised the Shunammite son to life. He caused a pot that had poison in it to be okay to eat. And he fed 100 men with just a little bit of food. The miracles of Elisha, who followed on the heels of Elijah, who was doing the same kinds of things. So why didn't Jehoram think about Elisha? God was obviously with him. So why not try that? Our little servant girl had more confidence and more faith in God and Elisha than the king of Israel did. Just keep that in mind. So we have Naaman who comes to Elisha. And so what happens? Well, I will tell you, number one, no red carpet. There was no notice of his importance or his position. Not even the courtesy of coming out and seeing him himself. Elisha sends out his servant to see him. And I just need you to appreciate the fact that would be highly insulting. And then what's he told to do? He's told to go down to the Jordan River and dip 7 times, wash himself 7 times. Now, here are 2 pictures of the Jordan River that we took this last summer. The one on the right is further south, supposedly the area in which Jesus was baptized. The one on the left is in the north. Listen, I don't want to get into that water anywhere. Okay? And Naaman says, it's nothing like the Abana on the Pharpar. There's the Abana on the Pharpar. Now, I'll get in that water. Maybe it might be too cold, but look how blue and crystal clear and clean it is. And you can see on the inset map where Damascus is. The Abana River is just outside that to the south, and the Pharpar is just a little bit further south. So what was Naaman's reaction? Well, part of Naaman's problem was he'd already formed a picture. He had in his mind what should happen. He had a notion of the honor that would be his, because surely the prophet would come out, call on the name of his God, wave his hand over the spot, and there'd be all kinds of ceremony and pomp that would be involved in that. And none of that happened. In fact, a servant comes out and tells him to wash in the muddy river 7 times. And so he flew off in a rage. My translation says he went away angry. And flying off in a rage and going away angry, what did he take with him? His leprosy. He took his leprosy with him. And again, cooler heads are going to prevail here because we have his servants counseling him. In verse 13, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? If the prophet had come out and said, you need to sacrifice 1,000 bulls to the God of Israel, would you not have done it? And Naaman would have answered, of course I would have. I'm doing just about anything to get rid of this leprosy. It is a horrible, life-ending disease. And the servants, knowing that, said, well then, why not just go do what he said? Why not just go to the river and wash? And so he did. And when was he cleansed? After the 7th washing. And how thoroughly was he cleansed? Verse 14 says his skin was like that of a young boy. How many of you remember the skin of a young boy? I don't remember that anymore, unless I get to see one. So let me kind of step aside here. Was Naaman healed by the act of dipping? No. Listen, if dipping in that spot caused the healing of leprosy, somebody would have built a spa there, and it would be flourishing, and every leper in the world would be flocking there because that dipping there in that water would have done it. What healed Naaman was his faith in what Elisha had told him. And how was his faith manifested? By washing 7 times in the Jordan River. So how is that parallel to baptism? It's an exact parallel. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 8 says, for it is by grace you've been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God. What has God told us to do by faith? Go dip, get dipped. And when you are in faith, you will be raised to walk in newness of life. We could put it this way, for it is by grace you have been healed. And that's exactly what healed Naaman, was God's grace, based on his faith. God has always operated that way. This is not an exceptional case. This is the normal situation. So let's get back to our slave girl. First of all, can you see how God operates in the world in this text? And let me maybe make that a little bit more clear. How does our world operate? And I will tell you that almost always our world operates from the top down. A king, a CEO, a boss, a leader wants something done, and what does he do? He tells somebody under him to get it done. And that may cause a chain reaction, because the next person is going to tell the person under them, and it'll get finally down to the person who will actually do the job. Okay? So how did God accomplish what he wanted done? Now, how did he operate here? And I will tell you that he operated from the bottom up. From the bottom up. Start with a slave girl. A slave girl who has completely no value in that culture, who told the wife, who told the husband, who told the king. From the bottom up. And listen, in fact, when the earthly, worldly way was attempted after that by Naaman, so you had the king ordering his vassal king to heal his servant, and then you have Naaman even thinking that's the way it worked too, because I'm somebody important and you're not, and so you need to do what you're told to do. Naaman found out that top down doesn't work in God's economy. In fact, when Naaman went off in a tantrum, again, how did it work? From the bottom up. The servants came and told Naaman. Think about this. So how does that all apply to us? And how does God use us, especially with regards to saving others? And I want you to think about this. I want to get you to give your mind to it. And as I begin now talking about what God expects of us to reach others with the gospel, I can pretty much guess what most of you are thinking. Do you want to hear? Want to hear what I think? Number one, most of us think you're not able. You can't do that. I'm not able to do that. I don't have enough. I don't have enough knowledge to talk to somebody else about Jesus. I don't have the ability to do that. I don't have the experience to do that. You may even get as far, I don't have the charisma. It's not my personality. I'm just not that person. So let me ask you, how much did this slave girl have of knowledge, ability, and experience, and charisma did she have? I mean, here's a young, unimportant little slave girl. And the answer to how much knowledge and ability and experience she had, the answer to that is really easy. None. She had no experience. In fact, the slave girl is not even going to be on site when Naaman is ultimately healed. Not even going to be around. Not even in the same country. Her job ended with sharing her faith and the hope of healing with her mistress. That's when her job ended. And yet, and listen, that's all she had in her arsenal. That's all that she had in her bag of tricks. She had nothing else. And look what it accomplished by her doing what she could. So let me ask you this. What do you think is your responsibility when it comes to the salvation of your neighbor or your friend, your coworker, or whoever it is? I think most of the time we think our responsibility is the whole process. Well, I need to reach out to them. I need to set up a Bible study with them and sit down and share the good news. And I need to make them a disciple of Jesus Christ on my own. And I need to bring it to completion by seeing that person brought into Christ and baptized. That's not what I see happening here. That's not the process that I see happening here. There are layers of people that are involved in this process and layers of servants. And that's the same case here. We have, listen, God has time, he has space, and he has talent that he can bring from the outside to help you, what you initiated. There are others that God will bring the task. You're familiar with 1 Corinthians 3. Paul says, after all, what is Apollos? What is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So there's all kinds of people involved. So let me ask you this, so what do you know, or what is it that you can share? And maybe before that, what do you believe? Do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? Do you believe, as we just memorialized, that he died on the cross and was raised from the dead? And do you believe he's right now reigning at the right hand of God? And if you believe that, have you acted on that faith yourself? There may be reasons why you haven't. Maybe you don't think that you're old enough yet. I teach young people in a camp every summer, and the kids that I'm teaching are between 13 and 18. It's okay for you to decide you're not ready yet, not old enough yet. I often make the comment, how can you decide to make a life commitment to Jesus Christ when you don't know if you want to be a fireman or an astronaut or a ballet dancer? Listen, if you can't even figure out what you're going to do in your life, how can you possibly be mature enough to make a full-on life commitment, living sacrifice to the Lord? I think it takes a little more maturity than we generally give kids credit for. So I try to encourage them not to let anybody push, pressure, or make them feel guilty that they haven't come to the Lord yet. On the other hand, maybe you're not ready to make the commitment, because it's going to change your life. And listen, that's okay too, because Jesus in the parable in Luke the 14th chapter told us, you need to count the cost. Listen, when you become a child of God, the whole heart has to be involved. You have to understand intellectually what's going on. You have to understand emotionally what's going on. And you have to be willing, totally on your own, to do this. And you need as well, and I think this is true, realize that in holding back, which in some circumstances will be well and good, can cause others to be held back. I have known people very close to me who had not become Christians or were no longer faithful, but man, they would argue till they were blue in the face about the Bible. That you need to do this and you need to do that. This is true. Baptism is absolutely required, and they haven't been baptized yet. Why would anybody do what you say is absolutely necessary to do when you haven't done it yourself? We need to be consistent. But regardless of this, I need you to understand that being a disciple is not the same as being a child of God. In fact, before you become a child of God, you need to be a disciple. You're a disciple right now. You're learning right now. And if you're not willingly here, you're still a disciple. Still learning. And still learning. And listen, so you're in that position, you can still tell people, I'm just learning about Jesus. I wish you could come and learn with me. This is kind of interesting. And that's all this slave girl did. She knew about God. She knew about Elisha, and she just passed on that information to her mistress, not even directly to Naaman. She handed it off to others. And look how that succeeded. Naaman is healed. He feels he realizes that Yahweh is God. And so he asks Elisha, please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as two pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. Now that kind of goes along with his superstition that gods were localized. And so he wants the dirt from Israel to be where he's going to be worshiping, because that will connect him to Yahweh. But even in that, he says, but may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. And he's going to go on and talk about when he's in the temple of Rimmon with his master. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he's leaning on my arm, I mentioned that a moment ago, and I have to bow there also. When I bow down to the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this, because I really believe that God is God. That resulted, here's a pagan commander of the enemy armies who now believes in Yahweh. Because one little slave girl commented that there's a prophet in Israel who can heal my master's leprosy. Listen, what you do is you just share what you know. You share what you believe. You don't have to take it any further than that. Romans, the first chapter, in verse 16, Paul says he's not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and to the Gentile. The power is in the world. In the Word, you may see an opening and drop in a seed. You may see something beginning to sprout and pour some water on it. But it is not your charisma, it's not your knowledge, it's not your experience that God's not limited by any of those things, whether you have a lot or a little. The power's in the gospel. And as Tim led us in the song today, the gospel is for all. Or, listen, it may be, and we talked about this at the men's thing yesterday morning, it may be your life, it may be your example, it may be your confidence, it may be your habits. And in living that life and trying to be a godly person, your light is shining. And as Paul said in Philippians, we shine as lights in a dark world. And that may cause a person to look at their life and say, wow, I don't have that kind of confidence. Maybe God has you in that person's life for that very purpose. Maybe you're like the wind that blows the seed out of the tree and causes it to, in my front flower beds, and I don't even know where there's a fir tree close at hand. There's some around. But every once in a while, my flower bed, a little fir tree will grow. The wind isn't blowing around saying, I think a fir tree would look good there. Let's blow that seed over there. No. Has no concept of what it's doing. It just blows the seed drops. And maybe you're blowing through somebody's life and dropping a seed. It doesn't have to be intentional. In fact, most of the time I would probably guess you're going to be unaware of the fact that you've done something. But you are doing something. Just like that slave girl did. And God can use it. Which is the main point here. All of us, are just ordinary people. And that's always the kind of people that God uses. And the more ordinary, the better. Paul said we have this treasure in jars of clay. That's you and I. We've got the gospel in this plain old human body, not particularly, superhuman or anything like that. And so when that all-surpassing power of God is seen in our lives, then God is the one who gets the credit for it. Because it's certainly not coming from us. That's what Paul says here. And God is glorified. And as we started off the year with that theme, listen, that's our greatest goal, is the glorification of God. So there's two really quick lessons I want us to just recap here. Number one, God works in the kingdoms of men. I still believe he does. And the second thing is that God works in our individual lives as well, if we'll let him. If we'll let him. And listen, it does not matter how old or young you are. God can still use you. He is not limited by you in any way. So, today, this week, take some time and meditate on yourself and pray and ask God to show you how he can use you. If you don't know, ask him to show you, and then ask him to use you, and then just be watchful and alert and say, oh, there he did it right there. That's how he's using me. All of that from a little slave girl in 2 Kings chapter 5. So, are you open to being used by the Lord? We went through that list. Do you believe that Jesus is the Christ, that he died on the cross, that he was raised from the dead, and that he's at the right hand of God right now? And have you taken advantage of that? Have you thought about it, considered it, and realized that that's something that you want? If it is, then please let us know. We're about to sing a song, Live for Jesus, which is talking about the rest of your life. And if you're already a child of God, have you been living for Jesus? Have you been open and receptive and active in just sharing with people what you know and what you believe without any other greater necessities? Listen, the seed has to be sown somehow. And if it sprouts, there's plenty of people here who are willing to take it further, wanting to take it further, and looking forward to being able to do that. And if you feel like you've been kind of holding back and want some encouragement, whatever it is that you need spiritually this morning, if we can help you, please come forward while we stand and sing.